Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would discuss something I saw in the comments because someone had said, hey, the same things that you say about the box squat, I say about pin squats all the time. And I think that they're pretty much interchangeable. They can be a replacement. Pin squats can be just as good as box squats. And I'm going to completely disagree there on a number of reasons. Number one of the reasons that we do box squats, this is only one reason, keep in mind, arguments against individual points aren't going to matter here. You have to look at the sum total of this. One of the things about box squats is that they're easier to recover from. Okay? We are forced to use a lighter weight. We're forced to use more compensatory acceleration. And usually when I have a lifter outside of an early novice phase, and again, most people running the conjugate type system, we use box squats for speed work. We do maxes on them too, but we use them for speed work. Now for maxes, pin squats are done sometimes, depending upon what someone has available for equipment. Right? If someone has very limited equipment, pin squats become a lot more valuable as a max effort exercise. But that's because we have to come up with seemingly random movements. Right? We need a lot of variations of the squat. The bench, the deadlift, things like that. And so pin squats become just a tool to max on, not because they're pin squats, but because they're a different squat than the last squat we did the week before, or the week before that. Does that make sense? They're done for that reason. It also lets us do things where we can break them up, to where we can do a bottom up. We can do them directly off pins, or we can come down on pins and then drive up. So we've got two different exercises out of a pin squat with the same bar. But that's it. For training itself and development, we wouldn't use them because they're harder on recovery. Hitting pins and getting beat up on pins is harder on your recovery. And I'm not saying pin work doesn't have its place for specific lifts for programming purposes, for short blocks as far as supplemental work. It can. But if we're talking about something we're going to do every single week, like speed work, if you were to do this hitting pins all the time, it beats you up a little bit more. Okay, we're getting the exact opposite. In other words, pin squats are arguably harder on your recovery than a normal back squat is. Box squats are easier on your recovery. They're much easier on your recovery because we're forced to use a lighter weight. You're not going to be able to box squat what you can back squat. And if you can, occasionally you see someone who they try to back squat, and if it's weaker than their box squat, it's because they're not back squatting correctly. And I see that occasionally with a client who you teach them how to box squat, and then they do try to do almost an Olympic squat when they take the box out again, and then wonder why they're weaker. It's like, why didn't you just do a power squat like you did on the box? You would have had another 40 pounds on the bar. Instead of being 10 pounds weaker than your box squat, you'd have been 30 pounds stronger than your box squat. Use your box squat form without the box, and you'll be stronger. But the point is, we have to use less weight because we do most of our volume with a box squat. And if we understand why we're using the box squat, that makes sense. Because we're doing 95% or more of our squatting as speed work. And so since that's where your volume is, you want the easiest version to recover from. All right, the other things to look at, the compensatory acceleration component. Off of pins, you don't have to use your muscles to accelerate. In other words, with a box squat done correctly, you come down to the box and then drive up, you have to use your hips and hip extensors to break off the box, right? We unload the hips, we keep the torso extremely tight, and we drive up. Our muscles have to start the weight from a dead stop. They have to start the weight from a dead stop. And the data that's been out there looking at this has found that the box squat has the highest rate of force production of any type of squat. And it's because of that. It's because we have to use muscles to drive from a dead stop, and there's no real way around it. Unless you rock the box really hard, if you keep your torso tight and that bar mid-foot, you have to use your hip extensors to explode off the box. With a pin squat, you do not have to do that. Why? People say, but that's a dead stop also. No, it's not. Not for your body. For the bar, it's a dead stop. The bar comes to a dead stop. Your body doesn't. you could drop down an inch and get a little bit of momentum to drive it off the pins. Okay, unless you're trying to stay super tight. But a lot of times if you watch people do pin squats, right, if they come down and touch the pins, you'll notice they readjust and drive up. In other words, their body gets loose, and then they drive from having no weight. They drive from an unloaded position for their body into the bar to drive it off the bar. Because it's very hard to come down and stay tight because the weight gets unloaded. The weight gets unloaded off your back when the pins catch it. When you come down and touch the pins, let's say you've got whatever, 300 pounds on the bar. You no longer have 300 pounds on your back once it makes contact with the pins. The pins may be taking 100, 200. They might be taking all 300. If you get slightly loose, the pins are taking all 300 pounds. So it lets you get loose and then use momentum to drive up, to drive it off the pins. Now, that can be useful in some cases for finding certain sticking points in a squat, but it's not the same thing. When you do a box squat, the weight is on your back. Okay? You cannot get loose. Your torso has to support the weight for the entire rep. It's all the way at the bottom. So if you got 300 pounds on the bar, that 300 pounds stays on top of your back. There's no pins to reduce the load. Now people say, but what about the box? Well, the hips can unload a little bit, and that's the idea. But your torso has to stay tight. Torso has to stay tight. Okay, and it breaks up the eccentric concentric chain in a way to where the hips can unload just momentarily and then drive up. But they can't really get momentum unless you rock. So if you keep everything tight, you don't have momentum to work with. You have to drive from a dead stop. So that's the difference. The difference is in this case is that the weight is still pressing down on you and just the hips unload a little bit. And that's with a box squat. With a pin squat, the weight itself can unload off of you. And it has to some extent. You can't physically come to a stop on the pins and keep 100% of the weight loaded on your back. You would have to stop short of the pins. You'd have to stop like, a tenth of an inch short of touching the pins. The second you make contact with the pin, some of the weight is guaranteed to unload. And in some cases, it can be all of the weight could unload if you just get slightly loose under it. So they're not really interchangeable. They're completely different for our purposes here. And I'm not saying pin squats don't have a place for some supplemental work, but we cannot replace box squats with them in the way that we use box squats. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.